Begin the current Daf Pesachim Daf Pei Dal. We begin 3 lines at the top of the Yommi. The Gemara continues the next Mishnah, which continues on the halachas of the Korban Pesach, specifically regarding that everyone has to have a kazayas of basar to be counted on the Korban Pesach, and what exactly is considered meat of the Korban Pesach. Which is corresponds to the Chesed and Daf Chaim. We're doing today's Daf. So we discuss in today's Daf are which parts are considered meat, with which one can fulfill the mitzvah of eating Korban Pesach. Specifically, there's a large discussion regarding gidin, regarding sinews, the tendons in the animal. The Gemara then has a discussion regarding the scope of the issur to break bones of Korban Pesach, which says in the Torah, "Lo yisish," but not supposed to break the bones, and why the issur does not apply to a Korban Pesach puzzle, either because of lava nitig laseh, which is the concept that if you have a negative prohibition, which can be rectified, ameliorated with a positive command, you don't get lashes, or because of lava shem ma'is, which is another general category, which is if it's a passive violation, you don't get lashes for that too. So we begin the current Daf, Pei Dal, 3 lines down with the Daf of the Yomid, we begin the Mishnah. Whatever could be eaten by a large ox, meaning whatever is going to get hard in the animal already got hard, and then only if you could eat it when the ox is older and everything is harder and still it's edible by the large ox, only then then you could eat by a soft goat, which is fit to be eaten for the Pesach even if it's 8 days old. Now, in contrast, what cannot be eaten when the ox gets older, then you cannot count that as that's what you're going to be eating as your kazayim, even though right now it's soft. But since ultimately it's going to become hard, that's not considered as basar, and therefore you cannot count that as your chelik in the Korban Pesach. And so too, v'roshei kinafayim, the ends of the shoulder blades, v'hasachusim, and that's the cartilage, for example, let's say by the ear and by the chest and these small little ribs that there are at the end of the spine. Those things are soft cartilage, so that could be considered as part of your kazayas, because everyone has to have a kazayas in the Korban Pesach, and that could be counted towards the Korban Pesach. Now, the Gemara says, Rabbi Rami, he poses a contradiction. He says, I don't understand. Tanan, you said in the Mishnah called Nefesh Argol, whatever can be eaten only when the ox is, even when it's big and it's strong and it's hard, but it's still edible. Then you then you can do when the goat is soft. But what cannot be name a sefer. What do you mean? Look at the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, what's also included is the ends of the shoulder blades and the cartilage. But these things, when they get by an ox, when it gets older and tough, these things get too hard. So that contradicts in the Mishnah itself. You just contradict yourself. So the Gemara has two approaches. The Tanai, you write this is how you're supposed to read the Mishnah. Whatever could be when the ox is older, then it could be eaten when the goat is soft and young. But you're right. What cannot be eaten cannot. And you're right. That would exclude the shoulder blades and the cartilage. But v'yesh oimrim, it's supposed to say in the Mishnah, and there are those who say that since by the ox itself, when it gets older, even those things, the ends of the shoulder blades and the cartilage, could be eaten if you cook it really much, a long time, it will be edible. So therefore, even as a small goat, it could be eaten. That's one interpretation. Rav Ame says, no, actually, even the Tanna Kama agrees that these parts are considered meat. Because mahein katani, the Mishnah is supposed to say, what are these? Meaning, this is how the Mishnah is read. And this word is being added on. Whatever is eaten by a large ox, bishalka, even when it's cooked a long time. But if you cook it a long time, even by an older ox, then it's going to be able to be eaten. Then you can eat it by the young goat, not stewed a long time, just as the Korban Pesach is done, just roasted, but you cannot stew it. And what is that? That's even including Rosh Hashanah, even the ends of the shoulder blades and the cartilage by the ear and by the chest and all the other types of cartilage. That is also going to be included. Tango says, and the Gemara brings the Bryce that supports this last interpretation of Rava. The Bryce says, whatever can be eaten by the large ox, not stam roasted, right? If you were just roasting it, it wouldn't be edible. But if you really cooked it a long time, then it would be edible. Then you can even eat it by the young goat, even when it's roasted. And what are they? That's even even the ends of the shoulder blades and that of the cartilage, where again, although it's not really edible, but if you cook a long time, it's going to be, but that's included. The Bryce just concludes, which this we didn't mention in our Mishnah, begin harachan and the soft tendons, nidan kabasar, they are qualified like meat, which that actually takes us into the next Gemara's discussion regarding gidin. Itmar, we learned gidin shesayv al-hakshas, regarding tendons that are ultimately going to be hard, which are the tendons in the neck. Now, in a young lamb and goat, they're soft, but when they get older, they become hard. What's the halachic status in these tendons? Like we're saying, you need to have a kazayis basar to eat. It has to be something that's edible. what is the halachic status on these tendons in the neck? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Nimna Lema Pesach, yeah, you could count yourself as your portion in the Karban Pesach. There's nothing left. You're left with the gidin in the neck. It's okay. Now it's soft. You could go ahead and use that as your chelik. Rish Lakish says, no, Einam Lema Pesach, you cannot use it as counted for your kazayis in the Karban Pesach. And the Gemara explains. Rabbi Yochanan says, Nimna Lema, you could count yourself on that because Shabbos HaHashal, you go based on that. Now it's soft and edible. Rish Lakish says, no, Einam Lema, you cannot be counted on that because Bazar Sev is going to go based on the end. As Rashi explains, this that we quoted in the brisa right before that said Gidim Harachin, that the soft tendons are considered like basar. According to Rabbi Yochanan, he learns it means now it's soft, and therefore it's going to be sufficient. Rav Shalker says no, it's talking about other types of tendons that will always be soft, not just now. That's their machlekes, how to read that brisa. But the Gemara says Eisvei Rav Shalker Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Shalker asked Rabbi Yochanan from that brisa we quoted before, but from the first part of it. The brisa said, whatever can be eaten by a large ox, then you can eat it even, only then can you eat it by a soft goat. And what are they? The ends of the shoulder blades and the cartilage. Now, says Rish Lakish, Haniyin, as the Gemara assumes right now, from the fact that the brace is specified, what are we talking about? Shasayf and Lahaksh, that are ultimately going to be hard. Because, like we're saying, Mahin, what are they? It's specifying only these things, meaning the ends of the shoulder blades and the cartilage, but other tendons, which will ultimately be hard. No, that's not included because you specify these things. Why this? Just say anything that's going to end up being hard. No, obviously, in general, things that are going to be hard are excluded, which is not like Rabbi Yochanan, because you don't go basa hash, you go basa b'sayf. Amalei, so he says, no, Tanahani, no, it wasn't specifically these things. He used these as an example, but the same thing would apply to all, as the Gemara explains. Hani my time, what's the reason of these things that I'm telling you that they're included? The end of the shoulder blades and the cartilage, because you can eat by a large ox, even though it's not, if you just, let's say, roasted, it wouldn't be enough, but if you cooked a long time, it would be edible. These things, meaning old tendons, like the tendons in the neck, should end up being hard, could be eaten by a large ox when you cook it, so it has the same reasoning why you should be able to eat it by the Gedi Harach. Not related, however, to this machlekes Rabbi Yochanan Shlakish, only Rebbe, and he says, when you go in front of Rebbe Vahu, Rabbi poses him a contradiction in Rabbi Yochanan Alain, in Rabbi Yochanan himself. Me and Rabbi Yochanan really says, we just quoted him a moment ago. When you have the tendons, the ligaments in the body that are going to end up becoming hard, let's say those in the neck. He says you could use them as your account for your kazais in the Karban Pesach. Alma, so you see, he goes based on now, because if you go based on later, it's going to be harder when it gets older. But you don't care, you go based on now. But Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan in a different context. He asked him the following halacha. He says, the skin of the head shall egel arach of a soft calf, which the Gemara Chulun Daf Kaf Beis explains, as long as the calf is nursing, the skin of the head is soft, then you could scalp it, and you could eat the skin with the animal. So it's a soft skin of the top of the head of a young calf. What's the halacha? Well, that skin has tumas eichlin. Tumas eichlin is a food item, what's edible has tumah. Now, generally leather, which is the hide, it's not a food item. But now, do you go based on now? Now you would eat the skin of the calf with the animal, because it's very soft and edible. And if it's going to have it laws of tumah, or do you say you go bust b'zayif at the end? No, skin is not a meichel, and if it's not going to be mitami. V'amaloi said to him, "Ein mitame." No, it's not going to have tumah. Wait a second. I'm a bust b'zayif as linan. From that statement of Rabbi Yochanan, you see that he goes, you go based on the future, not now. That contradicts what we said in our story. He goes, you go based on now. He said to him, whoever asked you this question, he's not concerned for his flour. He doesn't care what he's grinding. If it's wheat, if it's the junk part, the refuse. Rabbi Yochanan retracted to Rish Lakish from his teaching over here regarding the Gidnish Sefer Lahakshas. As the Gemara says in Chulun Daf Ayin Zayin Beis, that Rish Lakish answered to Rabbi Yochanan from the Gemara in Chulun that when Rabbi Yochanan responded and that he said that regarding the soft calf, that it's not going to be mitame, as we just quoted, because you go based on the end. Rish Lakish asked him from a Mishnah in Masechtas Chulun that says that these things, their skin is like the meat itself, and one of them was the soft skin of a young calf. So Rish Lakish said, so you see, go based on now. And what did Rabbi Yochanan respond to him? Don't provoke me with that Mishnah. I learned that Mishnah that it's only a das yachid, that's an individual Tana. And the Rabbim, the Rabbanah, they disagree with that Mishnah. So obviously, that initially in our Sugya, Rabbi Yochanan thought to rely on that Mishnah, and therefore he disagreed and he held that Begin Shasevon Hakshes is going to be kosher. But then he recalled, as he responded to Rish Lakish over there, that that's only Das Yachid, and therefore he said, don't ask on me from there. In other words, we had a contradiction. Here he makes something go Basa Hashem. There he's saying Basa Soifas Leva. So he said, whoever asking the question, that's a contradiction. He didn't follow the flow of the Sugya, because that Sugya itself has Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan and says, what, yeah? You tell me that's not going to have Tumah with Basa B'Soif? What do you do with the Mishnah that says, Elush, I was saying Kibbasaran, that the skin of the young calf has the same halacha like its meat itself? So you see, go Basa Hashem. He says, don't ask me from that Mishnah, that's a Das Yachid. Which obviously, you see, that was where Rabbi Yochanan himself had initially thought that was an authoritative Mishnah, and he relied on, that's what he was saying here in our Sugya, but he retracted from our Sugya. He holds like over there, as he himself responds, says, that Mishnah don't ask me, that said Basa Hashta. That's because it's a Das Yachid, but really the Rabban, the Sugya, they hold Basa B'Soif, and therefore, like he says within that Sugya, it's not going to have a Tumah Soifa. And if you're right, over here in our Sugya, he doesn't really hold Gin Shasevon Hakshes is going to be able to be Nimna Love, because he retracted over there, and he holds like Rish Lakish in that regard, that it's not, you cannot be Nimna Love. It's not considered, because since it's going to ultimately be hard, it's not considered as Basa right now either. Then I'll look at the next Mishnah, regarding the Isurim, the prohibitions that relate to the eating of the Korban Pesach. It says in the Mishnah, if someone breaks a bone in a kosher, pure Korban Pesach, the Seder night, breaks the bone, he's a loy carbon. He gets lashes, 40 lashes, -1, he gets 39 lashes. Now, but if let's say someone leaves over even, betar, he left over the Seder night, the got fachap and this and that, they didn't eat it the whole Korban Pesach, and it's next morning ready. Or Vashem B'Tamim, if someone, let's say, breaks the bone of a Tummy Korban Pesach. So regarding these two cases, in Alex Abam, he does not get 40 lashes, doesn't get Leisisiru for leaving it over, and he doesn't get Leisishberu for breaking the bones of the Tummy Korban. The Gemara is going to explain both of these halachas. As the Gemara says, Be'eshlem and Meiser B'Tar, I understand why if you leave over in the meat of the Korban Pesach, then you don't get lashes, even though you violated a negative prohibition of Leisisiru, because it's not like Linda Bryson. It says in the Pasuk in Shemais, says that like you don't leave it over until the morning. But whoever leaves it over until the morning, like the pasuk there concludes, you should burn them in the fire. Says the Gemara, where the pasuk is telling you a positive commandment to ameliorate, to fix after the negative prohibition. To tell you that you don't get lashes, that's the Rabbi Yehuda. Because what's called the lavanitic laseh, any negative prohibition that can be fixed with a positive commandment, you don't get lashes, because it sounds like that this is how you fix it. If you violate negative prohibition that you left it overnight, do this and you'll be saved, which is to burn it. Additionally, like Rashi says, you also cannot compare the negative prohibition to the lav of chasima, which is to muzzle an animal when it's working, which that's not a lav hanitik laseh, what's done is done, which Malchus is said near that pasuk of chasima, and therefore you also see from the pasuk alain that the only time you get lashes when it's similar to chasima, and that's not by the case of when it's nitik laseh. So two smaras why lav hanitik laseh doesn't get lashes. Now, that's the Tanakama. Rabbi Yaakov says, no, limit Hashem says that's not the reason why you don't get lashes by leaving over from the carbon from Neisser. Because it's a passive, it's a negative prohibition it's not an active violation. And you don't get lashes for a passive violation. So okay, fine. But regarding the other halach of the Mishnah, let's say if you break the bone of a tummy Korban Pesach, what do we know that you can be parted from Malchus? That's an action, and that's not nitik laseh. Because the Amakar says the pasuk in Shemais, it says that a bone you should not break in it. What's boy in it? What do we mean? Of course we're talking about it. No, but kosher by a kosher Korban Pesach, but live apostle not by an invalid one. As the Gemara talking about in the Brayso, that's the Mesish by the Tanakama says like we just said, the bone you should not break in it. But because by apostle in it, a kosher one, not an apostle one. Rabbi Shloimy, he says from a different source, and this is going to take us to the end of the Daf. The whole Amud Beis is going to be discussing 8 different interpretations in this machlekes. Rabbi Shloimy says, it says in the pasuk of this, in one house you should be eating the Korban Pesach, etc. In the same pasuk it ends off, that the bone in the Korban Pesach you should not break in it. Now, why are you comparing to tell you, whatever's fit to be eaten, that's going to have the issur of breaking a bone. But it's not fit to be eaten, then there's no issur of breaking the bone. Now, the Gemara wonders, by now, what's in between these two different interpretations? They seem to be saying the same thing. Only by a kosher Korban Pesach that you could eat, is where you have the issur of breaking the bone. When it's possible that you can eat it, so then there's no issur. So the Gemara is going to bring 8 different interpretations to tell us what's the difference between these 2 different interpretations. Number 1, Pesach haba b'tumah. A Korban Pesach that's brought in the state of tumah, meaning when it's Gans Klal Yisrael, the tzibur is coming, you're allowed to bring the Korban Pesach in the state of tumah. That's the difference between them, as the Gemara explains. According to the one that says that only when it's kosher, only then is it going to be us as you between them and bays. Hi, puzzle. As Rashi explains, what do you mean it's puzzle? It's not puzzle. Yeah, but it was done bipsul because tumah is what's called d'chuya b'tzibur according to this Tana. It's it's overridden, but really it should be invalid because a carbon cannot become tummy. And the exeris are custom to exempt you and say, okay, even with the psul, it's going to be okay. So quote unquote, it's a carbon puzzle. So you're not going to have the issur of shvius etzim by a pesach haba b'tumah according to this interpretation. But according to Rabbi, who says that it's only Korban Pesach that's fit to be eaten, there's also fit to be eaten, as the Mishnah told in Daf Yomi, Pesach haba b'tumah nechel b'tumah. So that's one interpretation regarding their machlokes.
The idea is that tumah korban that you're not chayav, it's a malchus, but it's the shaykh the iser. It says boy, so then therefore maybe there's no iser of shvira setzer. Or we say it's user, but malchus we don't have.
For which case? If it's Pesach haba b'tumah?
Yeah, it's either b'tumah. When I said the name of boy, b'tumah. So I say boy, and nicht b'tumah. So that means this is allowed like a tchila to break it, or just not.
And it sounds like that there's no issur at all.
No issur at all.
Yeah, as I said, it's on the issur lane. Now, every one of the next 7 interpretations are all going to disagree with the premise of the first answer. He says, no, the case we just described, the Kulam, everyone agrees, there did not be a problem about breaking the bone. And he says, I'll tell you why, because the Rebbe, who says that as we roll achila, la kuli ka'asik, that somehow they had a tradition that Rebbe was coming to be lenient. The high ha-pasalu. This case, you're saying that it's pasal. So, since it's quote unquote pasal, so then everyone would hold that you can be pasal. That cannot be the reason. That can't be the case that Rebbe's disagreeing. Rebbe would hold that you can be chayv because roel achila, because Rebbe, his qualification of roel achila is a leniency. This interpretation was saying that Rebbe's the stringent one and the Tanakh is the lenient one regarding the issur. It can't be because Rebbe, we know a tradition, he was coming to be lenient. So therefore, rather, all the other interpretations are going to go with that premise that Rebbe's more, not that Rebbe's more mach than the Tanakh, but rather is more lenient. So rather, a different interpretation. The difference between them is, if at one point the carbon was kosher, but then subsequently became possible, that's the difference between them. The mandam according to the Tanakh says that it has to be a carbon that's kosher to be violating the issur hakosher. So it's kosher because all the avodas were done in a valid way, and it only subsequently became possible. So yeah, it would be usher to break the bones. Lamanda Maroy Lachil, the one says it has to be fit to be eaten, like Rabbi, Hahashta Lavroy Lachilu, but right now that it became tummy, whatever still happened, it's not fit to be eaten. And if it wouldn't be an issur of breaking the bone. Abaya may disagree, says no. And each one interpretation shows that why the previous interpretation, everyone would agree that it wouldn't be a machlokes. Everyone would agree no. In this case, there would not be an issur of breaking the bones. What's the reason? Right now, it is possible. You can't call it a carbon kosher, even though it had a shasa kosher that at one point was cut. Right now, it's possible. So everyone would agree: A, you can't eat it, and B, it's possible. So no one would disagree that it would not have the issur. Rather, the case is, if you break the bone when it's still daytime, before the Seder night, on the 14th of Nisan, which is not a time of eating it yet, that's Akiv night. That would be the difference between them. The one that says kosher, it's a kosher carbon. The other one has to be fit to be eaten. Right now you can't eat it because Erev Pesach, you're only allowed to eat it by the Seder night. But the Gemara says, Meisvah, the Gemara here, this is the one interpretation. The Gemara gets off a little bit on the side and asks on this and says, wait a second. There's a price says Rabbi Yomi, he says, you could be counted. Again, everyone has to be, you have to have enough for Gezais Basar to be a member of the Korban Pesach. So he says, even if the only thing that you have that you're going to get is the Malach, in this Korban Pesach, everyone, the fly sheet gets this and he's getting this and you're left the last guy on the list. The only thing you can get is the marrow in the head. You can be counted on that. It's okay. That's because the marrow will be enough. It's basar. Now, but interestingly, you cannot be counted on the marrow in the thigh bone because there's an issa breaking the bones. How are you going to get to the marrow? How are you going to get the marrow? And I'll break the bone to get to it. But the marrow in the head, you could take it out with a spoon and this twig through the nose, through the nostril. You could suck it out through that hole. So therefore, it's going to be valid with the head, but not with the thigh bone. Now, says the Gemara like this, as we just explained. The marrow in the head, what's the reason? Because you could schlep it out and you could take it out. But based on the previous interpretation, that you told me that you could if you could break a bone from before, you tell me according to Rebbe that there's no isser in the carbon Pesach to break the bone on Erev Pesach, because we said it's not roy lachila. We said according to the Tana Kama that it's kosher carbon Pesach. And the Rebbe that we said it's not roy lachila, so we said you're not going to be violating the isser. So, which means to say that according to Rebbe, breaking the bone from before Pesach is okay. I mean, he's not going to violate in the isser. Right? It's not roy lachila then, and that to qualify as the isser has to be roy lachila. So then koilas nami, you understand? In the thigh bone also, break it from before Pesach. They take out the marrow, and then we count on it. So why can't you use that as counting for your chelik in the carbon Pesach? The whole problem is breaking the bone, but you're allowed to break the bone according to Rebbe and Pesach. So if I would tell you no, according to your reasoning, I'll tell you a svara also. Then regarding when it gets dark also, you also could avoid the issur breaking the bones. Nice to kumrata, bring a coal, v'neches alav v'nikla, and put it on the bone, and let it burn till it makes a hole, and you can take out the marrow, and you can be counted on it. What do you mean? That's breaking the bone. No, the time like a learn a brisa. I will serve about someone burns the bones, or he cuts not in the bone but in the tendon. It's not, there's no issur breaking the bone, it has to be breaking the bone, not burning the bone. So according to you you're asking on me, so to speak, on my pshat, what am I going to do because I said according to Rebbe not going to violate Erev Pesach? What's with you? Well, you also should have, why should my Shabbat not work? You could get the marrow out somehow without breaking it. Now, what are you going to tell me? Why can't you be counted and on the marrow in the thigh bone and take it out with a coal? For two reasons. Because maybe if you're going to put a coal on it, it's going to make the bone burst somewhere else, and that's not burning, that's breaking. Meaning the fissures the tremor is going to make it break somewhere else. Meaning if where you're burning, that's okay. But by you're putting on the coal might cause it to crack somewhere else, that's breaking. So therefore that's why I'll do it. As a concern for that. Or Rav Amishon has to touch it because what happens is if you're going to put a coal, it might ruin the marrow that's inside and it's going to burn it, that you're actively ruining kachim, because maybe the fire is going to eat from the marrow, and better let it become invalidated by itself, by nicer, and not actively by your burning it. So if that's the case, here also regarding the burning, so I'll tell you also, here also from before Yom Tov, even though you're right, biblically it's permitted, like we said in Rabbi, but there's rabbinic concern because if we let you do it when it's before day, you might come to do it when it's nighttime. In other words, just like you have to tell me that the reason why we can't count of the thigh bone, that marrow, is because of a concern it might crack or it might burn. So also by me also, you're right. Biblically, there's a way to get the marrow in the bone, thigh bone, by doing it according to Rabbi and Erev Pesach. But it's a gezer. If you let you do it at Pesach, you might start cracking bones on the Seder night too. And if that's a reason why, so that's not difficult as interpretation. But again, anyway, Rav Papa he refutes the previous interpretation for a different reason. He says, Kol Ka'agab, no, the case that was just previously described, everyone would agree that there is a isser of breaking the bone. What's the reason? Because you can't say that according to Rebbe, it wouldn't be chayiv because it's quote unquote not roy lachila. It is roy lachila. It's just the time has not yet begun. But of course it's roy lachila because at night it's going to be roy lachila. So even Rebbe would agree that there would be. So what's the case that they're disagreeing about? This is interpretation number 4. Regarding a limb, that some of the limb went out of the walls of Yerushalayim, which then you have to cut off the part that was called yoitzi that went out. That's the case that they're disagreeing about, as the Gemara explains. Mandam akasher. The one who says that it's kosher, it's kosher because the inner part of that limb is kosher. So he could break it off, and then he's going to be violating leisishbu by. Rather, what you have to do is actually we'll learn on the Mishnah on the next daf. You actually have to cut off from the flesh until you reach the bone. Then you peel off until you reach the joint, and then you crack it off over there. But one thing is that if a limb goes out, the animal is still a kosher carbon, so you'd be violating this of shiur sats. But the one that says it has to be fit to be eaten, but the place of where you're breaking it is not fit to be eaten, and therefore there wouldn't be Isser of breaking, which Taisus wonders, Taisus doesn't know, finds it difficult this interpretation. Why considering the carbon as kosher more than being edible? Whatever is not fit to be edible is not kosher. So Taisus, it is a little bit of a difficulty, but what the Gemara is saying is that when you have Eibush Yatzim Miktsasai, the carbon is a kosher carbon, so there should be Isser of breaking the bones. But al Tzroy Lachila, no, this where you're breaking it, which is where it went out, that's not right to be eaten, because that's Psul of Yitzim. So therefore, that would be the case, there would be the difference between them. But let's say if the whole limb went out, which meaning that it had a Shas HaKodesh that became invalid, according to everyone, according to Tanakam, there would be no Isra breaking, because right now it would be puzzle. But if only part of the limb went out, so the whole carbon is kosher. So that would be the case, it would be kosher, but it would not be roy lachila. And that would be the machlekes regarding if you'd be chayiv for breaking the bone between Rebbe and the Tanakam. In the Brisa, he says, you have a limb, the part went out and he broke it. Even that would be like Rebbe, there's no Issa breaking the bone, again, because not Roy Lachila, the part that went out. And that's where you're breaking it, where the part went out. Again, it's difficult teretz, like this says, but it's still kosher, the Pesach, but that part is not Roy Lachila, and that would be the difference between Rebbe and Tanakam. Interpretation number 5. Rav Sheshes Brid of Idiyama, he says that Kol Kagav, no, he disagrees with the previous interpretation. He says, no. That case that we're everyone agreed there's no Isser breaking the bone, because the Ha'ivra, Ha'pasul, that limb is pasul. What do you mean? How can you say it's kosher? The part that went out is invalid, and therefore everyone would agree that there wouldn't be Isser Shriyas Etzem. Ella rather, he says Shriyas Etzem Benoik. The difference between them is when you break a bone in a partially roasted carbon Pesach, as follows. Man da amar kosher, according to one that says that it's a kosher carbon, hakosher, the carbon is kosher, meaning you could still fully roast it. No is the Isser, not like the carbon Pesach partially roasted, it has to be fully roasted. So it's still kosher, you just didn't do the fully roasting yet. So of course you have a Shriyas Etzem. Man da amar lachil, but the one that says to be fit to be eaten, hashin or lachil is not fit to be eaten right now, because if you would eat the carbon Pesach in this current state, you would be violating the Isser of eating it partially roasted, it has to be fully roasted. Oh, so that's the case. It's the difference between Rebbe and the Tanakama, because it's not real lachila, but it's kosher. 6. Rav Nachman Yitzchak, he disagrees. He says no. Kol Kagam, the whole case that we just said, yes, Rav Shloimy Schwartzberg says, everyone agree that there would be Issa breaking the bone. What's the reason? The Chaz al-Chila, it is fit to be eaten, because the Mat v'levochle, just roasted, you'll be able to eat it. You can't say it's not fit to be eaten. Every carbon Pesach is not fit to be eaten until you do the roasting and everything. So, of course it would be fit to be eaten, and everyone would agree that it would be an Issa Shviyas Etzem. And rather, he says, Shviyas Aliyah Kunai. The difference between them is breaking the tailbone. The Aliyah, the fatty tail, that bone, that's the difference between them. It's part of the carbon Pesach, it's kosher. Why not? Because the aliyah likroya salka, the fatty tail of the sheep, which is what the carbon Pesach is brought from a set, it's the tail is sacrificed with the emur, the sacrificial parts. In contrast, by a shor and the a's, by a goat and the ox, there it says that it's not, but by here it's totally sacrificed. So therefore, it's not roy lachila because you're not eating it because it's sacrificed in the mizbeach. Rav Asher, he says no, he contradicts that one. He says, no, the case you just described, no, there's no Issa breaking the bone. It's not fit to be eaten at all, and therefore, of course the Tanakh would agree. Even though he says kosher, but kosher is obviously only that it has some type of viability. Here has no viability at all for the owner, there would not be an Issa breaking the bone. Rather, the difference between them is, interpretation number 7, that we're talking about a limb, which you have a bone inside that you're cracking, that does not have an olive size of flesh. That's the difference between them. Says this limb is a kosher part of the kosher carbon Pesach, so you'd be chayv for breaking the bone. The man according to one says it's be fit to be eaten, being a shiur achila v'leka. You have a measurement. What in halacha, and when we say in the pasuk says achila, what does that mean? That's a shivik kazayis, and that's you're not going to have. So if it's not going to be considered quote unquote va'achlu that they're eating to be chayv on the shviyas etzem, so therefore that's the difference between Rebbe and the Tanakh. Ravina, he's the last interpretation. He says no. No, even the case that you just described, if you don't have a kazayis bas, everyone would agree that less than shviyas etzem. No, there would not be an issa breaking the bone because even the one that says quote unquote kosher, you have to have a share of achila, and since you don't have that everyone would agree in Tanakama there's no issa breaking the bones. Rather, what's the case talking about? We're talking about a limb that doesn't have an olive-sized piece of flesh in the place of where you're cracking the bone. But there is an olive-size of meat on the other part of the limb. You know, sometimes you get that bilik, you know what I'm saying? On one part of the bone is din, and the other part is the shtick flesh. So the way you're cracking it, doesn't have a gazais basar, but other part of limb does have. That's the difference between them. The one says kosher. This is definitely a kosher limb and it has gazais basar on it in the entirety. But the one that says that the Rebbe has to be eaten, has to be in the amount of eaten in the place of where it breaks. For leka, and that you don't have. That was the eighth interpretation of the machlekes Rebbe and the Tanakh. It says go to Tanakh with Karbam, and we have a brayse that says like four of them. Tanakh learn the brayse. Rabbi Yomi says it says the pasuk in Shemais. It says b'bayis achad ya'achil, where it's quoting the opinion of Rabbi over here. In one house it should be eaten, and again it talks about eating, which that's where you get this idea of rola chila. And then the pasuk ends off etzem l'sish b'bay, and the bone in the korban pesach you shouldn't break in it, which tells ala kasher chayim, on a kosher animal you're liable. But you're not chayiv on when it's pasal. And now the Brayse is going to explain which pasal are we coming to exclude. Says the Brayse, we had a time that it was viable, and it became pasal at the time that you were eating it. Which interpretation is that? That was interpretation of Rav Yosef, which, because right now it's not roy lachila, even though at one point they had a shasa kosher, imam shemeshvius etzim. So that does not have the isser of breaking the bone. So that was like Rav Yosef's interpretation. Then the Brayse continues. We're going to show four interpretations here in the Brayse. Yesh b'shir achilav has the amount of eating. Then yesh b'shir etzim. If that's the case, it's going to have the isser of breaking the bone. Ein b'shir achilav doesn't have the shir of eating on it. Ein b'shir etzim it's not going to have the isser of breaking the bones. That's either like Ravina, which at least if it has a kazais of meat somewhere else on the bone, or it's coming to exclude if it doesn't have a kazais at all, which is like Rav Ashi's interpretation. Haroy l'mizbeach then says if it's fit for the mizbeach, aimim mishum shvei says there's no issue of breaking the bone. That's excluding the alya, the fatty tail, which is sacrificed in mizbeach. That's like Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. And finally, b'shas achila yesh mishum shvei says only at the time of eating is there the issue of breaking the bone. If it's not the time of eating, there's no issue of breaking the bone. That is like Abaya, who he said that when it's Erev Pesach, that's what Rebbe's coming to exclude, to say that then, since it's not Rosh Hashanah, then you're not going to have the Isra Shir Sessions. So four of the interpretations here in this Brisa qualifying the opinion of Rebbe, which is out of the eight interpretation, what we said is Machlek is Rebbe and Rabbanan, regarding when we say that the Isra of breaking the bones of Korban Pesach is only on that of a Korban Pesach kosher. What's that coming to exclude when we say Pasul or Royal Achilu, which sound like the same thing, but we found eight different interpretations of what the differences would be. Some of these we discussed in today's Daf. Psachim Daf was, we started with the Mishnah, that whatever's eaten by a shur hagadol, meaning even though it's very tough then, but in that animal it could still be eaten, then only then can you eat it by the soft goat, and the ends of the shoulder blades and the cartilage. Now the question is, but those things that you said there in the Seifa actually are not eaten by shur hagadol. How could you say those two? So either it's machlokes tanaim, it's supposed to say the yesh aimrim, or actually that it's mahen, that it's qualifying. And what are we including over here that could be eaten b'shar gadol, meaning b'shalka? I thought it can't be eaten because they get hard. Yeah, but if you really cooked it very long, oyster cup, all these things that can be able to be eaten, then that's included in that you could eat it by the young kid goat. Then we got into discussion because the Brisa ended off by supporting that second interpretation said regarding gidin, the tendons. So the Red Machlekes regarding gidin shesem al-hakshis, if you could be counted in the Korban Pesach, we go based on what it's like right now, because it's still soft toes in the neck, or we go based on the end. Now, Rabbi Yechon ultimately retracted from his opinion over here that he says you go basar hashta, and that you could be counted in it, as we find the difference of Yimsat Schulin, that because he says that actually the skin of the head of the young calf is not metame, but right now it's edible. Obviously, he holds that you don't go based on now to get it to Mazaycha, we only go based on the end. But in the next mission, we said if someone breaks a bone on Pesach, of a Korban Pesach, if it's tahar, then he's going to get lashes. But if it's tameh, or if he leaves over even by a kosher Korban Pesach, he's not going to get lashes. Why not? So regarding that of leaving over from the Korban Pesach, so that either because nitik laseh, because you could burn it, so you don't get lashes, or because no ma'aser. What's the reason of when you break the bones of a tameh Korban Pesach that you're not going to get lashes? So that was a machlekes. Either because it says in the Torah boy, which tells you only when it's kosher, not apostle, or like Rebbe said that no, it's specifically when it's royal achila, because it says babai sechad yachal, talks about eating, and then they mention at the end of the pasuk this is breaking the bone. Now, what's the difference? 8 interpretations. Either a Korban Pesach comes in state of tumah, which is it's pasul, so to speak, because of tumah is the chuya, but it's royal achila, because a Korban Pesach brother said you could be eaten, so that would be a difference. Or no, and each one, we don't have to say that, each one said that the previous interpretation, everyone would agree one way or the other, so that can't be the machlekes. Second interpretation says no. They had a shas kosher, and then it became pasal. So it's kosher, but right now you can't eat it. So that would be the difference. Third interpretation was if you break the bone from before Yom Tov, where it's kosher Korban Pesach, but you can't eat it right now. Now, what do you do with the case of the marrow in the thigh bone? Just like the Gemara says, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Just like the case you could put on a coal. Why wouldn't you say you put on the coal to get the marrow out? Either because you're concerned it's going to shatter, or it's going to break the bone, or because of a loss of kachim of the marrow. So also over here, you're right. According to Rebbe, you could crack the thigh bone from before Pesach because there was no Issa Shvius Etzim from before Pesach, but it would be also as a Gezerah because Atam Meshach HaShecher. Just like you obviously hold it to Gezerah for some other reason, so don't ask on my interpretation. But anyway, the Gemara rejected the interpretation for a different reason and said a fourth interpretation is that, the difference between them is part of the Eber goes out, where it's kosher, you can't eat that part. Or the fifth interpretation was if you break the bone when it's partially roasted, it's kosher because you can still roast it, but again, at this point you can't eat it. Sixth interpretation was you break the tail bone, which is kosher, part of the kosher Korban Pesach, but you can't eat it. It's actually burned in the mizbech. Seventh interpretation was it's a limb that does not have on it a kazayis, a basar, where it's kosher, but there's no shiur of achilu. Eighth interpretation, no, it has a kazayis, a basar, but somewhere else. So it's kosher, but there's no shiur achilu in the place of where you break it. And the Brisa ultimately brought out of the eight interpretations of this opinion of Rebbe, which disagrees with that of the Tanakh. I think there any time hosting us.